I was thinking back to some of the books I had to read in English classes throughout my school years, and wanted to share which ones I liked, which ones I didn't, and maybe how I feel about them now. So I'll go through from elementary school to middle school and high school. This will only have the books I remember reading, so there might be some I miss, and as a French immersion student, there are plenty of French books I read, which won't be mentioned here. This also won't contain any textbooks or poetry books. We also had to read some Shakespeare plays, which I won't go into now. In elementary school, I remember reading both of the first two books from the Chronicles of Narnia series. Both The Magician's Nephew and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe are great introductory fantasy novels. I don't think I could even say which I prefer. Both good and inspired me to read the rest of the series in my own time. Beyond those books, I also got to read one of, if not my favorite, book of all time, with The Hobbit. That book introduced me to The Lord of the Rings and is really just a lot of fun. The setting is great and well thought out, the main characters have great arcs, and the side characters add interesting color to the world. The Hobbit will even appear again later on. For middle school, things were done a little differently. We chose our own books to read, and then took a quiz on that book to gain points which would determine our marks. Each book had a different score value, so longer or more challenging books were encouraged. So for this I read some of the Harry Potter books, which are fun, but they were kind of easy reads, and therefore not worth many points. I then reread The Hobbit and read the Lord of the Rings trilogy. This is what really made me into a Lord of the Rings fan. I liked the series from the films and The Hobbit, but wasn't super invested or interested until after reading the books. That is what really pulled me back in and got me to rewatch the films with more interest. I then tried reading a bunch of smaller books to accumulate small bunches of points, but I can't remember the names of those ones, and they weren't worth it as I had to read so many to get any value out of them. That's when I started reading Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series, with the first book, The Eyes of the World, and the second, The Great Hunt. These books had great characters and another well thought out world similar to The Lord of the Rings. Sometimes the writing was a little too long winded, but overall the detail helped to picture the world, and I'm very much looking forward to the TV adaptation that's currently in the making. Now we get to high school, where I remember a lot more. In grade 9, I remember reading a westernish mystery novel named Death Watch. It was a pretty easy read, and overall I would say falls kind of in the middle range of books I read. Then we read The Hobbit yet again. This time was a little different though, as it was the graphic novel edition of it. This made for a slightly different read, and it was interesting to see the illustrator's take on Middle-earth and the characters therein. In grade 10, I read To Kill a Mockingbird, which I didn't really think would be the type of novel I would enjoy, but in the end I couldn't deny how great it was. We also read A Farewell to Arms, which at the time I didn't really like it that much, but I have since looked back on it more fondly and would like to reread it. I also later read another Hemingway novel, and that gave me a deeper appreciation for him. Grade 11 was a little different since the teacher brought a bunch of different books for us to choose from. The system was a little flawed since she let the top students pick first, so of course they chose the easiest book, which was The Hunger Games. Me, being a fairly average student, got Memoirs of a Geisha. It had some good moments, but overall I wasn't too impressed, as it had some long periods that I felt were unnecessary to the story. Then we got to choose new books, and I went with one called Elsewhere. The concept was great, and it put forth some interesting ideas, though the actual story was only mediocre. Still, I would consider it as a wonderful surprise. Then grade 12 came along, and we read my least favorite book of all my time at school, Wuthering Heights. I know that book is considered a classic, but it is not an interesting or fun book, which I feel all books should be at least one or the other. Wuthering Heights has very little happening, and yet is fairly long. The other books I read in grade 12, however, were great. We read Of Mice and Men, which gives such a wide range of emotions, from sweet joy to deep sadness. We also read the other Hemingway book I brought up earlier, The Old Man and the Sea, a short read but a great one. Of course, throughout those years I was reading other books on my own time, and occasionally got to do assignments on those. One, for example, I remember writing an essay in grade 11 about Theron Fleury's autobiography, Playing with Fire. There were likely others I don't remember, but they must not have stood out enough for them to stick with me. So I'm curious, did you have to read any of these books in school, or did you read any of them on your own time? What did you think of them? Thanks for watching.